Section 2.3 and 2.7, Quadratic Functions and Their Zeros, Part 2. Example 1. Is 3 a zero of the function x squared minus 10x plus 21? Why or why not? Now recall that to find zeros, we want to set f of x equal to 0. Since we're already given a possible 0 of 3, all we have to do is plug it in for x. And if we get that our function equals to 0, then we have a 0. Let's go ahead and do that. F of 3 is equal to 3 squared minus 10 times 3 plus 21. Well, if we simplify the right-hand side, we get that f of 3 is equal to 0. Since I did ask why or why not, we're going to go ahead and just write a simple sentence. It says, since f of 3 equals 0, 3 is a 0 of the function. Example 2. Now, in example 2, we are being asked to find the zeros. Since the zeros, and I forgot to put an e there, since the zeros are just the x-intercepts, to find the zeros, we set what? Well, if you said y equals 0, you are correct. Now, another way to say that is that f of x equals 0, since f of x and y are just the same thing. And then solve for x. I'm going to go ahead and set my quadratic function to 0. Okay. Now notice that we have 3 terms, therefore we do have to factor, and there are many different ways of factoring. If you know a certain way, like the diamond or the box or anything else, please stick to that. And if not, I'm going to give you a method, but if you'd like to learn a different one, just email me. So this method I'm about to do is called the box method. And the reason it's called the box method is because we actually draw a box. And we're going to split this box into 4 parts. Now in the first part of my box, we're going to write the first term of my quadratic equation, and in the last box we're going to write the last term of my quadratic equation. Let me just write here last term. Okay, so let's go back and look at my quadratic equation. So here we have our first term, and then here we have our last term. Go ahead and put those in the correct places in your box. And we have 6x squared and negative 4. Now, what do we put in the remaining parts of our box? Well, what multiplies to give us the product of the first times the last, and I'm right here, this is where I'm reading. And notice that our first term is 6x squared and our last term is negative 4. Therefore, 6x squared times negative 4 is equal to negative 24x squared. So what 2 factors multiply to give us negative 24x squared, but at the same time add up to give us our middle term? And in this case, our middle term is negative 5x. Now, if you're not too sure, you can go ahead and list the factors of negative 24x squared, and that's what I'm going to do now. In fact, I'm actually going to just for now take 24x squared. Can you think of a few factors? Well, there's 12x times 2x. What other factors are there? 6x times 4x, 8x times 3x. Well, you get the point. There's also 24x times 1. But did I already write 2 factors that add up somehow, if we add negatives or positives, somehow add up to negative 5x? If you pick the last one, then you are correct. Now, we have to be careful with our signs. Where does the negative belong, on the 8x or on the 3x? Which one is going to give us the negative 5x? If you said negative 8x plus 3x, you are correct. This will give us our negative 5x. So these two terms here are the ones we're going to put in the remaining parts of our squares. Okay, so we have, in the order, by the way, does not matter. I'll just write negative 8x here and 3x here, and those can also be switched, so they do not matter. Now here, in these spots here, we're going to write the GCF, or the greatest common factors of our two terms. It's kind of like a reverse multiplication table, and I'll show you what I mean in a second. So we're going to write our GCF. Okay. Let's start with these two here, the 6x squared and the negative 8x. What is the greatest common factor? If you said 2x, then you are correct. 2x is our greatest common factor. And then now let's go ahead and do the next ones. 3x and negative 4. What is our greatest common factor? 1. Okay. And then let's go ahead and do the next row. So we just did the columns. Let's go ahead and do the rows. What is the GCF of 6x squared and 3x? If you said 3x, then you are correct. And finally, we have one more row. What is the GCF of negative 8x and negative 4? Now, one thing I do want to point out is that, and I'm going to write it here so you don't forget, if the negative term is first, you must factor out the negative. Factor out the negative. What do I mean by that? Well, take a look at this one here. I factored out a positive 1. I didn't factor out a negative 1, even though we had negative 4 here. And that's because the 3x didn't have the negative, which is my first term. Now, if we look at this row here, the first term, which is negative 8x, does have a negative. So I'm actually going to factor out that negative. Now, what's the GCF? If you said negative 4, you are correct. So if you remember about a minute ago, I said this is kind of like a multiplication table. And the reason I said that is because if we multiply 3x times 2x, that's 6x squared. If you multiply 3x times 1, that's 3x. And this is actually a good way to check your work. Negative 4 times 2x is negative 8x. And finally, negative 4 times 1 is negative 4. So it's a good way to check that you did everything correctly. Okay, let's go back to our quadratic equation. Now that we have our GCF, this is really lovely. Our quadratic equation factors out to the numbers that we wrote here. These are our GCFs, and that's what our quadratic equation factors out to. 2x plus 1 times 3x minus 4. And because this is multiplication, the order doesn't matter. If you wrote 3x minus 4 first, that's fine. Okay, and you can always check your work by foiling. First times first is 6x squared. Outer times outer is negative 8x. Inner times inner is 3x. Negative 8x plus 3x is negative 5x. And then last times last is negative 4. So you can always do that if you would like to check that you factored it correctly. Okay, so now we have our quadratic equation factored. And one of these factors must equal to 0 since my whole equation equals 0. And then we solve for x. And that's it. We just found our zeros. So our zeros are negative 1/2 and 4/3. Okay. And I will continue this video in part 3. Thank you very much.